reset, Ron?
Yep.
So, we have a little bit of a smaller turnout than we expected because ironically people could not find sitters. We are videotaping it, so that should go out to a fair amount of people. So, obviously depending on what we're doing, the speed and sitting, people will see how you interact with people and hopefully resonate with one person or another with any touch. So I just want to introduce Micaela Shaw and Dana Michels, and they're going to tell us all about Urban Center.
Yay!
Go for it.
Hi guys, I'm Micaela Shaw, so I manage the LA market for Urban Center. So basically my whole role in life is creating situations for sitters and parents to meet each other and just get comfortable with the idea of hiring sitters online. So very foreign concept to a lot of us. I also have a 2-year-old, so my 2-year-old tests out a lot of the sitters, field tests I like to say. And Dana here has 3 kids as well, so she does her fair amount of field testing as well. And then we have 5 of our wonderful sitters here for you here to meet tonight. So just to kind of take you through my little agenda, first I wanted to talk through just all the different childcare options. I think that's something that a lot of us, just don't have the chance to think through all the options necessarily. So irrespective of Urban Center, what are all of the things that you could consider childcare-wise. Then also, the second portion, talk through some of the considerations that you might want to have if you're hiring childcare for the first time or going through a childcare transition. Maybe you had a nanny and all of a sudden you're getting more date night babysitters. Completely different set of considerations that you might have. And then last of all, just some interview questions or some things to ask your sitters before you have them in your home for the first time. I think that's a part that gets skipped a lot. Everyone knows they need to do their due diligence, but when it comes down to it, it's like, what do I really ask this person? It's not a job interview. Like, how do I get comfortable? And so then hopefully you can apply those great interview questions to speaking with these 5 ladies. Will give you the opportunity to actually rotate amongst them and hopefully meet someone that you can use for your next meeting. Sound good?
Yes.
Also, this is roundtable, super casual discussion, so feel free to pipe up if you think what I'm saying doesn't make any sense or have a question. Okay. So I in my 2 years as a veteran parent have been through a lot of different forms of childcare, irrespective of Urban Center. We've had a nanny, we've done a nanny share, we've done grandma care, we've done daycare, and so just kind of wanted to talk through, and if you guys also want to add to some of the pros and cons for a few different choices that you might make. So starting with daycare, I think daycare is a great option for a lot of people because it's standard, right? You're not going to have sick days in the same way. You have socialization. It's going to be more affordable than a nanny option. It's more regulated and standardized in terms of state guidelines. You kind of know what you're getting going in. Obviously, that's going to vary a little bit whether you're doing like a home daycare or more of a facility type of thing in terms of what you're looking for. But there can be less flexibility. We moved from Orange County to LA, and we're just floored at the wait list for these daycares. Pretty much, unless you're applying right now while you're pregnant, forget it. So availability becomes a big issue. Also, this issue of what you do if you have a sick child. You can't really drop a sick child off anymore, and you're going to have less individualized attention. So particularly if you have multiples and you all of a sudden you have 2 to deal with, that becomes obviously double the issue. Any experiences you guys have had with daycares, good or bad?
I just moved here.
Okay.
We just had actually had a mother's helper early on, and then it's actually worked out well, but it's hit or miss with that. So it's just finding the right person.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So yeah, we've gone through that transition of going from daycare and going to a nanny. The thing I really like about a nanny is it's just a more personal relationship with your family. I think it works a little bit nicer scheduling wise. If you have things like very specific dietary restrictions or something, you can really make that. I also just liked the idea of my son as he got a little bit older being able to be out in the world and go to parks and go to different play centers and not be in the same place all the time. I think I'm not not sure I want to be stuck in the same place all the time. I don't like being stuck in an office all day long. And so there is a certain benefit, you know, to them being able to be out and about in the world.
Late work,
yeah, flexibility I think is a good benefit. Absolutely. I mean, there is certainly the challenge of a backup system. If a nanny calls in sick or something, then I think I'll show you guys Urban Center, and so it has really changed things, and that you can post a job and all of a sudden getting people applying to that job at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. But it is much more of a lurch where you really need someone, and you don't, you know, have that person, you know, that staff of daycare that's already set up from a backup perspective. Also, I think transportation in LA is a unique nanny challenge. You know, if you're not comfortable with the nanny driving or the nanny doesn't know how to drive, then, you know, do you really live in an area that's walker friendly in your parks? That becomes a lot more relevant for us Angelinos. Also, a good option that I think a lot of families don't think through is the idea of a nanny share. That's something that's what we do for my son right now. We have a stallion family down the street, and we do a nanny share. I've seen it done two different ways. One would be if you have a nanny that wants to work a full-time schedule, but you just need a part-time schedule, you can arrange with a family to basically provide a full-time schedule but split the time. The other way, and the way that I do it personally, is that we have our kids together at their house, and so it's a full-time schedule, but it's, you know, two kids together, so it's a little more affordable for both of us. And I like it because it gives, I grew up in a really big family, and so for me it gives my son like more socialization and more of that fun stuff where you wouldn't have had it already. Au pair obviously is the extreme option from a nanny perspective, but that can be a really affordable option, especially if you have multiples. You know, whereas with a daycare, you literally be paying double the rate. Au pairs you can often get more affordably. They can be sometimes a little bit younger, more inexperienced, and also issues with like driver's licenses occur. So I don't know. I think you just have to really think: is this someone that you want living with you? And I think it's a different choice from experience, but it can be a really good one for a lot of people. Then occasional babysitters. I think that's something that whether you have a nanny or you have daycare or you just stay home with your kids, everyone's going to need an occasional babysitter eventually, because grandma at some point will not be available. And at some point you won't want to ask for a favor from grandma either. I think that something we all have to get really comfortable with as parents is this idea that it's okay to hire help and ask for help and not feel guilty about it. You have to take time out for yourself, and I think that's something that everybody takes their own time to do, and it really depends on your kids. But the more that you can practice, get it with that mother's helper, or just having people that are not directly in the family watching your kids, that the more liberated that you'll feel, and the better parent that you'll be ultimately. Some other concepts that just talking to parents in the community, sometimes people don't think about. Oftentimes groups like this do things like a babysitting co-op, and so I know some groups that essentially say we're going to get a group of 3 families together and just have two parents watch the kids for a date night and then one go out. And so especially if you have a big group of kids, that can be a nice way of doing it that shares costs a little bit. Most people don't really talk about that. And then also a lot of play centers like Camper and Play and some of these other play centers do drop-offs for date nights that can be pretty affordable to look at. Obviously, you have to schedule your dinner date directly around them, but it's a good way to just start to try to get comfortable with doing a date night on more regular basis. Any other forms of childcare that you guys have done before that I haven't really gone through? Let's just talk for a quick second about family childcare again, because I think that's an interesting one. Oftentimes when I talk to parents about Urban Center, they say, oh, now grandma lives down the street, I'm completely covered with it. And my mom actually watches my son 1 day a week right now. And I think that that's been great for us. I mean, obviously, you know how you were raised, and so it could be a really good option. I think the interesting thing sometimes about family childcare is that you understand like each other's customs, but you can't be quite as specific with rules and specific things in terms of schedules or what you want them to eat. That's off limits, right? You don't feel as comfortable doing that because they're essentially doing your favor. And so there's this nice delineation sometimes in some situations of provider versus family doing you a favor type of thing. Also that can come into hands depending upon how open you are with your friends, if you have your friends watching kids. And so I think just funny situations that we all run into. So the next topic was establishing your expectations for sitters and nannies. And I think that this is honestly one of the most important things that you can do is just do a really thorough job of thinking through exactly what you want out of a sitter. Obviously, if it's someone that's a little bit more long-term or a sporadic part-time sitter, then you're going to want to be more specific because this is someone that you're really introducing to your child, your children for the long term. But even with a date night sitter, I so frequently hear both sitters and parents, whenever any side is disgruntled, it's usually a result of lack of communication on the front end. And personally, I think that a big luxury of a site like Urban Sitter is that you can write in exactly what your instructions are in terms of, I want this, here's the Wi-Fi password, here's, the meal instructions. And so, whereas before you may have had to sit down with them and go through something, for a full hour and, felt like a really OCD type parent, you can kind of be OCD in text and, spell out direct instructions without, taking time out of time that you're paying them or the date night itself. And I kind of like that, the ability to just be very straightforward. Also, negotiating the price of a sitter is something you can, their rates are very clear on the site. Your expectations when you post a job in terms of what you're willing to pay are very clear. And so there's a lot less of this, oh yeah, my friend gave me your name on the back of the napkin, what can you do for me? I've got 2, I've got 3, like it's a little bit less of the back and forth, which I really appreciated about it. And more the personality. When I walk into a store, I don't want to have a long conversation with the salesperson. I just want to, look at the price tag and try it on myself and decide whether or not I look good. So some good things to consider as you're speccing out that job and the expectations that you have for sitters. What do you want to do for meals? I think that's one, especially if you're having a sitter during the day, that parents don't really think through. I know parents who don't want a sitter or a nanny in their kitchen at all. They're just not comfortable with that. They're not cool with the level of cleaning that they do afterwards. So they just give them a budget or a $20 bill and say, hey, go to Ralph's, go to Whole Foods, buy the kids some food, and we'll sit down. And that's perfectly fine. It just should be discussed on the front end if that's the expectation. There are some sitters who come to a job and expect, oh, hey, I'm here over lunchtime, I'm going to be fed lunch. A good thing, again, just to spec out whether or not you'll be providing a meal or not, so that it's not overlooked and there's no miscommunication on that front. Also, if you do want them to cook a meal, what does cooking that meal include? Is it, making a quesadilla quickly, or are you okay if they decide to get fancy and do some gourmet dinner that you'll be left with? Do you want them baking with the kids? Are they the age where you feel safe with that? It might be a really fun, great activity for the sitter to do with your family, but again, it might just not be something you're comfortable with, and so a good thing to think through. It's one of those things like you think you're on the same page with people, but a lot of times when either side is a little bit taken aback, I think it's just lack of communication in terms of expectations, and food is a good one. And then of course dietary restrictions are a huge topic in the city more than ever. What are your rules on sweets? Any store that you go into these days is offering kids suckers even when they're, like my son, 2 years old. So if you're really against that, you should speak up and make sure the sitter knows that, because every family is a little bit different. Food and dairy, any meat regulations. Again, it might be something that you think is very standard, but maybe your sitter grew up drinking soda, and so it's not rude for them to give your kids soda. So again, just very good to be clear on. It sounds like most of you have younger kids, but also I think particularly as your kids get older, help with homework becomes a topic, particularly if you've got them during the week. And so discussing if there are specific homework help expectations that you have, and kind of figuring out with the sitter if there are specific subjects that they are, would consider themselves experts in, if you can truly look at them like you would a tutor. You don't want them tutoring your child and then finding out that actually they're not really very good at math. So just having the conversation on the front end is a really good idea. Degree of tidiness and housekeeping. Number one complaint, absolutely, that I get on either side. I have a lot of new moms come to me and say, it would be my dream to have a sitter come to my house and watch my baby and also clean the house. Is that even possible? Are sitters willing to do that in this world anymore? And the answer is absolutely. A lot of sitters are really, really happy to do cleaning. But if you're not really clear about exactly what you expect on the front end, they're not going to be very happy if they think that they're coming for a babysitting job and then being requested to, scrub the shower to clean the entire house. And so, again, with kind of the perk of urban sitter, I think, is that you can be really specific in exactly what that job looks like, and the sitter can, arrive at a job expecting, to do the laundry while the baby's sleeping, or to, I'm not necessarily expected to clean the entire house, but I need to tidy the kids' play area before I go. And I think that that's perfectly reasonable expectations as long as they're, laid out there for you. And very common, which a lot of parents don't know. And I think, every sitter, I think there are some sitters who just naturally, that's the way they were raised, that's, what they have always done for jobs. Maybe a younger sitter hasn't, been in a house that is quite so OCD, and so some of it's a personality match too, understanding if this is a really detail-oriented, neat-freak person themselves, but the more specific you can be, the more happy you're going to be at the end of the day, I think. And that kind of leads into what, really thinking through before you hire someone on a recurring basis, particularly, what is your parenting style and what are your sticking points? So of course we all have specific ways that we like to raise our children, but are there specific rules that you say, okay, I'm okay with bending this or that, but I really feel strongly about this, and outlining those rules for this that are really clearly, I think, is important. Things like, do you believe in timeout? Are you okay with the sitter letting the baby cry it out when you put them down? What's okay in terms of that? Do you want them to do things like baby wearing? Are you okay with them taking your kid outside? Some people just, especially if they're meeting a sitter for the first time, aren't really that comfortable with the idea of them going around the block in a stroller. Maybe you don't necessarily live in that safe of a neighborhood. So it's a really good thing to outline and be specific about. And then, especially if you have more of a recurring sitter, I think that this topic, again in LA with this being more commuter culture comes up, is how far out do you want the sitter to take? So I've dealt with these conversations even a little bit with my nanny. She said things like, I think it'd be fun if we could go to Irvine for the day and go explore this. Irvine is actually kind of a long way, right? If you get stuck in traffic with two kids. And so, you really have to think through, like, okay, well, maybe I'm comfortable with a 10-mile radius, but I really want advance notice if you're going to have an excursion to Irvine for the day. And I think, you want a sitter ultimately that's going to be engaging for your kids and, expose them to new things, but, making sure that you're really comfortable so that there's no surprises and that you feel safe at all times, I think, is of the utmost importance. Another topic that comes up, we talked through cleaning a little bit, is this issue of errands. Oftentimes you might think, oh my gosh, they're driving right past my dry cleaner. Couldn't they just on the way, picking my kid up from preschool, grab that dry cleaning? Again, I think it's not completely off limits, but it just needs to be outlined on the front end really clearly if that's the type of thing that you might expect. And you want to be consistent with your expectations so that it doesn't become an issue. You don't want sitters coming back to you and saying, oh, we negotiated that I was just going to watch your kids and now the scope of work has changed a lot. So if you can be really specific and kind of think through whether or not that's something that you might like, the ability to ask them to pick up a few groceries or something once in a while, just having that conversation I think will make that last minute request a lot more easier part of your life and your family, then that's not a terrible request if you have the conversation on the front end. Language is another issue. There's a lot of sitters in the community that, coming from different countries or grew up with a different language. Some parents really love the idea of exposing their kids to a different language and having that be part of, just their overall childhood. But also, if your child is, just learning English, then having, someone with a heavy accent or who maybe doesn't have a full command of the English language can, stunt them a little bit. So you just want to think through, what your point of view is on that. There's a wrong or right answer at all, but a good topic to think through. Another conversation that I think is really important to have even with date night sitters, because I've seen this go the wrong way a couple of times, is what are their other relationships in their life? So do they have a boyfriend that sometimes wants to come around to the job and just hang out and watch movies? Do they have children of their own who might enter a play date situation? Or do they do nanny dates with other friends? That's very common in cities, for nannies to make friends with other nannies and want to do picnics and things together. And so just kind of thinking through your level of comfort with that. Are you okay with someone else coming around when they're on the job, or when they're on the job, do you really expect them to not have other people coming out? I think, again, it just really depends on you, and maybe at the very beginning you're not comfortable with any of it. You just want them focused on your child, and if they've been with you for 2 years and you really start to know them as people, then you want that. But I think communicating it clearly really can reduce awkward situations that you don't want to occur. Also talking through availability that you might need now and in the future. And so overnights are a big question. Maybe you a year down the line have a wedding in San Diego that you'd love to attend for the weekend. Or is that even an option? Are they available? And kind of talking through what the pricing would look like for that. A lot of sitters obviously aren't charging you the same rate by the hour when they're sleeping, and so what would their rate look like for that? Just so you know that it's an option if it ever comes up. Also, if it's someone that's a date night sitter, are they available during the day? Obviously, availability changes, but I think that having that backup in your pocket is the absolute best thing that you can do. That's why I always encourage people, even if they say, I've got childcare handled, I've got grandma down the street, I've got a nanny, I've even got a couple of date night sitters in my Rolodex, I don't really need anyone. Just interviewing a few people that you could call, or talking to friends and consistently having the conversation, I think will make you feel so much safer, when life happens, which it will, and it'll change constantly. And then finally, I think at the end of the day, you can ask all of these questions on paper. This can look like the best sitter on earth, but if their personality doesn't jive with your family and your kids, it's not going to work. And I think particularly with multiples, you've got 2 different personalities to deal with, right? So you really have to think through, how does this work, and is this working consistently as they grow up? Maybe they needed different things from a care provider, and that, more mature sitter worked really well for them when they're older. Now that they're running and wanting to play soccer, they need someone who's a little bit more active. And so just constantly asking them for feedback, being around if it's a day sitter once in a while, just to kind of check in on how it's going, and keeping lines of communication really open, I think is a really good best practice. Any questions on this consideration? Great. So then the last topic that I wanted to review is really interview questions for sitters and nannies. Like I said, sometimes people just don't really know where to start. I think a great place to start, first of all, I guess, to review different types of interview situations, because I'm not really sure people always know what their options are, right? So you, with Urban Sitter at least, you can schedule either a paid working interview, which is saying, I actually want the sitter to come to my house. I'm going to pay you to hang out with my kids. I'm just going to be in the house for 2 hours. That'd be very common, especially if you're looking for a sitter that is going to be there on a recurring basis. Then there's also something called an unpaid working interview. Most sitters in the community, again, varies, but most sitters in the community would tell me that a job that's under an hour, an unpaid working interview, would be very common for them. If they're looking for a relationship with a family that they're going to have on an ongoing basis, they typically love the opportunity to meet the kids and make sure they feel comfortable and have the opportunity to talk through your house tools before they're in a situation where you're late to that big gala or something and rushing out the door. So definitely would encourage that if you're looking for something a little bit more recurring. If you have something that's more last minute, a phone interview is also very common. So that's something that you can schedule through the site, and most phone interviews are unpaid. People also sometimes, if they are looking for someone on a more recurring basis, will schedule unpaid interviews outside of the home. And so I know parents that might go to a coffee shop and schedule an hour with 15-minute appointments with 5 different sitters and just sit at the coffee shop for an hour. Kind of like we're going to do tonight, speed date a lot of different people. As much as it can be really beneficial for the sitter to meet and interact with your kids, if you really want to ask them the hard questions, like, how did you grow up and where are your house rules? I found it can be a little bit hard if they're, trying to interact and really engage with your 2-year-old, but also have a conversation with you. And so, again, it really depends on your personality, what type of drilling you want to do, but you might want to consider some sort of a form of conversation where, they do have exposure to the kids, but you also have the opportunity to sit and, talk to them like you would in an interview situation. Because this is the most important job to you that they could have. And then finally, I think, we all have last minute situations. That's what Urban Sitter thrives in, I would say, is this ability to just look up, who's available on a Monday morning when you get into a pinch. But being able to rely on people who have successfully completed jobs in other families is a big benefit. And then also see who your friends have hired in the past. Those are 2 things that the site enables you to do. And so to me, we have reviews that you can read. Obviously, that's very confidence boosting. But when I see that Taylor has been booked several times by 5 different families and asked back multiple times, that gives me a lot of confidence because I say, okay, this isn't just someone who wrote a nice review and then never hired them again. If you're actually hiring this person multiple times, you think they're a good babysitter. And to me, that's a big booster. It gives you a little something extra. So some questions that I always like to start with would be, obviously, what is your childcare background? How long have you been babysitting? What ages have you worked with? And also, did you grow up around kids in the family? So a lot of people, have a lot of their childcare experience just comes from when they were very young, being around a lot of kids and trying to understand what that experience looks like can be very insightful. Also, where do you live? I think geography is so important in LA. There are a lot of sitters on the site who are willing to drive a long way to go and babysit for you. But having someone that's close, or at least has a schedule, maybe a work schedule that works around where you are. Think realistically about traffic and try not to see that through rose-colored glasses because you'll be more than likely disappointed. Are you comfortable driving kids? I think that even if you're not really looking for someone to be driving kids on a recurring basis, I think it still can be very confidence boosting that they can get in the car and drive your kids somewhere in an emergency and at least talk through that. If you know that they're going to be taking the bus to a job, for example, how would they handle an emergency and getting your kids there, having that plan. Again, it's just a reality in the city that it can be a little bit more complicated than maybe in New York where you had more options available to you.
It's so easy.
I know. For that especially.
So easy. So hard.
I think, do you have any health issues? That question can be a little bit awkward if it's someone that you're first meeting, but I think understanding do you have some sort of a health issue that might impact your availability or your ability to care for my children? You don't want people having terrible asthma attacks or something while they're on the job with your kids. So not really one that you would think to ask, but probably should, particularly if it's going to be more of a family situation. What activities do you like to do with kids? I like to keep this question a little bit more open-ended. just to see how creative they are. I mean, I don't want people just kind of sitting around and expecting me to come up with what they're going to be doing with my child all day.